On learning from failure. When we watch children building a sandcastle on a summer beach, we see creativity in action. The castle grows and becomes more elaborate as the children add moats, towers, turrets, and shells in carefully laid rows. The ongoing construction is always under threat of destruction from the rising tide, careless passersby, impish older siblings, and frustrated members of the construction crew. But unless disagreements and exhaustion take over, the castle builders convert whatever damage has been done into a temporary setback. They experiment to figure out how to build a better moat to stay the tide. A bucket brigade creates a pile of wetter sand. The construction project is moved up or down the beach to a better location. When children are building sandcastles, they're not afraid of failure because the stakes are low. The point is simply to have fun. Once we become adults, we're likely to avoid situations where the prospect of failing in public is high. Whether at work or school, most of us fear tackling a complex problem in front of our peers because of the possible consequences of failing. Embarrassment, shame, a lower grade, a demotion. This fear of failure stifles creativity and innovation. Not all people respond to fear of failure in the same way, though. In fact, creative people tend to have an attitude toward failure that's more like the kids on the beach than like a typical adult trying to solve a problem at work or a student trying to figure out what the teacher wants him to say. In What the Best College Students Do, Ken Bain argues that what sets the best college students apart from the rest is their willingness to acknowledge failures, to explore them, and to learn from them. Unlike less creative people, they don't deny their mistakes or get defensive about errors. Where does this ability to bounce back from failure come from? To answer this question, Bain points to a study that compared two groups of 10-year-olds who were each given a series of puzzles. Each group was given the same problem sets to solve and were told they could work together on finding the answers. The first 8 problems required the students to make real effort, but the challenges matched the students' age and education level. The next 4 problems were designed to be too hard for the students to solve. There were no differences in how the groups performed on the first 8 problems. Both groups talked about the problems as they worked through them, had fun, and came up with roughly the same number of correct solutions. But the groups' reactions differed greatly from each other on the second set of problems. The first group got frustrated, complained, and tried to change the rules. They started to make surprisingly poor choices, shifted their focus away from the problems, and gave up. The second group, by contrast, continued to encourage each other, tested different approaches, and seemed to thrive on the challenge, even though they couldn't solve the hard problems either. What caused the divergent responses? Students were grouped by researchers based on their attitudes toward intelligence. The first group had a fixed view of intelligence, and the second group believed that with effort you could become smarter. As shorthand, we call members of the first group the knowers and members of the second group the learners. When the knowers faced failure, They looked for an escape route because their failures called their intelligence into question. They went into mental tailspins, reverting to strategies that might be expected from preschoolers. The learners didn't take failure personally. Because they believed they could get smarter with effort, working on the problems was its own reward. When they never, even if they never found solutions, they valued learning things along the way. Obviously, we can't just snap our fingers and change ingrained beliefs and patterns of behavior. And we can't change the fact that in some situations, when the stakes are high and time is of the essence, it's nearly impossible to sustain an impersonal attitude toward failure. We believe, however, that it is possible to cultivate more creative attitudes toward failure through practice. One of the most important locations for such practice is in school, working on assignments that allow time for experimentation and revision. That's why we provide practice sessions that invite you to engage with open questions that can't be answered simply with facts or by following a formula to a straightforward conclusion. We want you to use your writing to explore genuinely knotty problems, ones that challenge you to think thoughts that are new to you. Under these circumstances, it is inevitable that your initial efforts will fall short of the mark. You can see that as a failure or as an opportunity to practice new ways of working on a problem. When we learn from failure, we discover that practice never ends. Richard likes to tell the story of what happened when he started revising his doctoral dissertation for publication. Having set the work aside for a couple of years while he was settling into his new job, he was able to return to his writing with fresh eyes. And after careful consideration and some additional research in the archive, he decided that there was really only one thing that needed to be changed about his dissertation, which he'd spent more than 2 years writing. The thesis. That's all. Only the frame for his argument and the argument itself. Only everything he thought he'd understood about the problem. While this may sound like an unusual experience, it isn't. In fact, it's a common and predictable part of using writing as a technology for thinking new thoughts. What we put down in writing isn't destiny. It's a snapshot of a mind at work on a problem at that moment in time. And if that mind keeps working on the problem, then a snapshot taken later will, of necessity, look different. We have a name for that difference: learning.